Now, one of the things I could do is I could flip this over so that it looks more like a reflection. Let me scroll down to the bottom. I'm using the mouse wheel to scroll through the property inspector and move down to the transform category. I'm going to click on the last tab, which allows me to flip something, and click here to flip my text over. You can already see on my artboard how all of the text, including all the words and everything, has been flipped. And I'm going to reposition this so that it's flat against the bottom of my existing rectangle. Now I'm going to apply an opacity mask. There are different ways to achieve transparency. We've already seen how to apply the alpha channel to a color to cause that portion to become transparent. And we can set the opacity on an entire control to a different value to make the entire control transparent. What I'm going to do here is apply an opacity mask. An opacity mask is just like any other brush in Blend, and it can be edited just like any other brush in Blend. But the only important piece of an opacity mask is the alpha channel. So right now, my opacity mask goes from a fully opaque black to a fully opaque white. Watch what happens when I change the alpha channel on the white stop to 0%. Now my reflection slowly fades from completely opaque on the left to completely transparent on the right. I can move those gradient stops around to modify how much of my element is visible and how much is invisible. Now I can also take the gradient brush tool and rotate my opacity mask. I'm going to hold the shift key to constrain it to 15-degree intervals and move it around so that the top of my reflection is fully opaque and the bottom is fully transparent. In actuality, as we're looking here, the top of my element is not completely opaque. That's because the tail of my gradient is way back here, a distance away from the element itself. Let me drag that closer. You can see how I can manipulate the brush transform tool, the gradient stops, and several other pieces to change the opacity, to change the mask, and to change the overall appearance of my reflection. Now when I press F5, you'll see that my reflection still stays in time. It still shows all of the pieces. So when I type in the city field, everything is mirrored correctly, but it fades away to go into the background. Now this is, again, just one example of what you can do with a visual brush. Let's take this a little bit further, and by using the tiling, you can make this even wilder. Let me close this window, use my selection tool, and make this rectangle take up the entire surface of my window. I'm going to use the brush transform tool on the fill and move it down under the name, city, and state. So I've still got the appearance of my reflection. I'm going to skew it. I'm going to remove that opacity mask because I don't really need it anymore. And now when I go to the fill, I'm going to change the tile mode from none to flip XY. Now since this rectangle's on top of all the rest of my grids, it looks wrong, so let me send that to the back. And then change the overall opacity of the entire control down to about 40%. Now it looks like I've just kind of flipped forward one of these tags from a whole sheet of tags. And watch when I press F5, you can see that all my animations are still being kept up to date. And as I type values, every single one of the tags has that information typed in for me. Now this is just one example of how you can use the visual brushes, and admittedly it's a bit over the top. But this should give you an idea of just what you're capable with when you work in 2D. Now let's take this even one more step and let's move it to 3D. So I'm going to close this window. And I'm going to open that second version of this project. This time, brushes 2.